Hi folks, Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel here in Washington, D.C., where we're going to be looking at some of the stories that are impacting the CPAC conference held in 2018. The President spoke there, the Vice President spoke there, but we also talked to some of those from Illinois who made the trek out to Washington, and we're going to learn why they think it's so important to come out here. What are the issues that they're focusing on? It's the Illinois Channel from Washington. Yvonne Bolton, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. You're from Illinois, from Joliet, Illinois, but you're here in Maryland attending the 2018 CPAC conference. Why did you bother to come up here? What is the impetus to come up and attend this conference?
Because I love being around my fellow conservatives. Coming from Illinois that is not so conservative, this gives me an opportunity to be around like-minded people.
And when you come here, do you come here for that reason, or do you learn anything while you're here, or what is the advantage of coming?
It gets me pumped up and motivated to do what I do all the time because I'm an activist at heart. And that is my goal ever since I became a Republican over 23 years ago. So I get fired up and go back to my very blue state and keep doing what I love to do, and that is to, as a Hispanic Republican, it's hard for me because ever since I became a Republican, what my main goal has been is to, what I liken to say is to get my fellow Latinos to come out of the darkness and into the light. What caused you, I presume you were a Democrat before, and what caused you to switch parties? I was raised in a Democratic home because my father was a politician. So you could say that I come by politics, it was in my blood. I mean, I was raised in it. So that has always been a passion of mine. I didn't get involved, though, until my baby graduated from high school, and I thought, okay, now it's my time. So once I got involved, when I started paying attention more, you know, when you're raised in something, you think that that's the way you got to be. But when I started paying attention for myself, I realized, wait a minute, those people do not represent my values or what I believe in. So I walked away and never looked back.
Let's talk a little bit about Illinois politics. We have the primary coming up on March 20th. As we tape this, it's about a month away. As a Republican, what are your thoughts on the run for governor?
Oh, wow. Where do I start? In 2014, I was duped into believing that the governor that we have now was a Republican. I had my doubts, but because certain people convinced me that he was a Republican and that he would represent, at the time, I thought, my values, I trusted him, I believed in him, but I was sadly mistaken. He did not, and he does not. I don't believe that he was ever really a Republican, so now, or a conservative for that matter. So now I am vigorously working and will work against them, and I am very passionately working for the real Republican, the real conservative in the race, that being Jeannie Ives.
As you talk to your fellow Republicans about the race, do you find that a lot feel like, you know, some are with Rauner, some are with Ives? What are you hearing as you talk to your fellow Republicans, and what concerns do you have? Some people think that Jeannie Ives would be too conservative to be elected across the entire state of Illinois. What are your thoughts?
Honestly, that really bothers me. What is real conservative? When I became a Republican, the reason that I became a Republican was because of what the Republican Party stood for. I get very irritated when people talk about, you know, what the party should be. I want to almost like stand up and say, wait, stop. The reason that I changed from being a Democrat to being a Republican was what the party stood for. And if you start changing that or messing with that, then what will be the difference between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party? So no, please, let's stand back and let's just stop and decide what we are. First of all, our duly voted on platform is still a solid conservative platform in Illinois, and Rauner betrayed that. So as far as I'm concerned, as a Republican, we have no obligation to support him. He did not stand up to that. So no. I think the Republicans that are still supporting him are confused. They should be supporting the real Republican, and that is Jeannie Ives.
Last question. You're Hispanic.
Yes.
The governor signed SB 31, which some people say made Illinois a sanctuary state.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
As a leader, I think that when a leader starts caring more about others versus its citizenry, I think that you are betraying the people that you serve. So that is all that I'm going to say in that. I think that a true leader, their first obligation is to serve the people that you serve. And I'm sorry, illegal aliens are not the people that he was sworn to serve.
All right, Yvonne Bolton, thank you.
Thank you.
Colonel Attorney Shaffer, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. I'm sure our viewers have seen you a million times on Fox. You're a frequent contributor there as far as your opinions, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Let's start off, what is the difference in national security that you've been involved in your career? What's the difference as we have transitioned from the Obama administration to the Trump administration in your mind?
Right, I think two things. First, President Trump has made it very clear that his intention is to actually use the massive economy that the United States generates as a tool of foreign policy. Now, let me explain that. When he says America first, it's all about making sure that we are able to enable the American worker. The idea is we should be manufacturing, we should be producing things and leading the world economy. So much under Obama was a service economy. The idea is we are consumers. I don't think that's what we want to do. I think big labor recognized that they were not being taken full advantage of regarding the ingenuity and capability of the American worker. And I think that's where I've seen President Trump make great inroads. Secondly, relating to the actual application of American power. The idea here is that we do not want to be an imperial power, we want to be a cooperative power. When he talks about NATO, he's not abandoning NATO, he's saying, you're our partners, you should be paying your fair share. So all of these things, I think, have been badly misinterpreted by the mainstream media. I think, indeed, the idea of America First has to do with how do we then create conditions for global success, not sit back and hope for the best. And you have to remember, President Obama's mantra was hope and change. President Trump's idea is action and innovation. And I think that's where you see a great departure and why the economy is now linked to national security, because frankly, that's the best thing he could do to help us be successful as a nation.
One of the things that just happened was that the Pentagon finally got a big boost in spending. They had been really damaged by sequestration over the last 2 or 3 years. As you, knowing what you know about where we are in the Defense Department and our build-out, and so two questions, where are we? And secondly, are we ever, in your mind, making the mistake of looking how many tanks and planes we have when maybe it's the cyber threat that might be more of a threat and we're fighting the last war rather than the future war?
Your last point is completely spot on, yes. I feel we have to have an effective defense, not an expensive defense. And to that point, I think we are funding far too many legacy programs looking at how we won the last war, not looking at how do we do cyber, do the adaptation of technology to gain advantage, not relive the last war. So I do admire and respect General Mattis. He's a great man. General Joseph Dunford couldn't be a better man for the chairmanship of the Joint Chiefs. With that said, I think they're both hobbled by the legacy of the enterprise, and so much of what we're funding still reflects old programs, and we have not done a cleansing or basically a zero-based review of everything, basically justifying everything. I was talking to a former member of the Trump White House, and he was saying when they were briefed on all these programs, no one could actually stipulate, okay, this is the program, this is what it costs. But what is it doing to benefit the American people? That question was never even thought of by the briefers. So this is where we need to go back and look at what are we buying, what is the inevitable use of it, if any, and if it's not, how do we then adapt that to the future? So these are things that are being worked. We're not there yet, but I have confidence over the next 3 years we'll continue to have progress.
In covering government for 25 years or so, it seems to me one of my critiques is that government is so many times reactive and not proactive. They don't look down the road. They don't think. One of the real concerns I would have, and I don't know enough to quantify the concern, is whether we are protecting enough the grid and what is happening, if any, and can we get our utilities to take this seriously? Because they don't want to invest in something millions and millions of dollars that they may never get any return on investment on. And then would you include in your answer, as they're a money-making enterprise, should we ask them to be making that burden, or should we indirectly say that is the role of government to step up to protect all the people in the entire economy, because if we lose the grid, we're out of business?
Right. Well, let me start with the last part of your question first. The Army and other military elements do believe fundamentally that it's their job to protect everything. With that said, there's a number of political hoops in the way. I just, surprisingly enough, came from a meeting with Ambassador Hank Cooper, who's been working this issue, who was he was a member of the Graham Commission relooking the whole EMP issue over the last few years of the Obama administration. And the honest answer is, we all know, based on our own military planning, that EMP is a specific threat. The problem is the utilities are not convinced, and the results of the Graham Commission, which studied this, the Pentagon does not want to release. But I can tell you in those findings, it will instruct the people running the grid, the FERC and the NERC, that these are the things you must do to harden it and protect it. And let me say this, if you don't have power, you don't have cyber. You can't think about cyber operations if you can't actually power a computer. So there's a group of us, to include Ambassador Cooper and myself, who are working this behind the scenes. And the answer is, you can fund it through 2 cents a person per month to actually harden the grid. And the consequence of not accepting this.
Now, where does that number come from? That's an interesting number.
It's basically
it's an estimate on what it would cost and how many clients.
The entire hardening of the grid would probably cost between $8 to $100 billion over a period of time. And to spread the wealth around, you give it to the.
I will tell people that's out of a $4 trillion federal budget, so it's not really a lot of money.
It's nothing. And the idea here, and you said, what's the economic issue? Well, the economic issue, if you have the grid fail, the Canadians have seen, for example, a high-level pulse from natural. The Toronto got hit by a pulse of EMP from the sun, from a sunspot, and it took down their grid and the power for several days. It cost them $10 to $20 billion. So the idea here is you're basically buying some level of protection from that. So the idea here is you want to harden the grid so you don't have these issues. And again, the economy stops. The moment that happens, the grid goes down.
And it's not just the economy. We're going to lose lives. We're going to have people in hospitals on ventilators and not going to run. And if you're running on backup systems, you're only going to have fuel for those for so long. So we'll come to a grinding halt.
So the idea here is, yes, several of us are looking at this. This is a key national security issue. We're right now trying to work with the National Security Council and the Pentagon, and frankly, Department of Energy and Homeland Security on this issue. We've been meeting with members of Congress, and we are trying to push for a clear recognition that this issue is a threat issue.
Last question. I could talk to you for hours because you're a fascinating guy. When you talk to members of Congress, does it fall on deaf ears, or are they getting it?
No, it depends on who it is. Full disclosure, look, I met with Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii within the last 2 weeks.
She's a Democratic.
Democratic. but she's very much concerned about the fact that the North Koreans offer a real threat against her people. So she is putting their protection first. And then I was in with Jim Jordan from Ohio. And Jim does take things very seriously. So I think it's more about the quality of the Congress.
How about Speaker Ryan? Does he?
Speaker Ryan is, I think, often behind the power curve of what needs to be examined. Look, I'm a big supporter of the Liberty and Freedom Caucus. I work with a number of members who are very much committed to trying to find innovative ways to stay ahead of the curve. Speaker Ryan, I think, is far too reactive, so I think that's something he could work on. So,
we know you're a busy guy, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you for you. It's great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Grandy. Thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. And we are here at the CPAC conference and happy to run into you. Ronald Reagan, as all people know, is the only president who actually was born and raised in Illinois, and he was often said to be proud of his Illinois roots as he went up and moved out to LA and had the career that we're familiar with, both in Hollywood and then in politics. Tell us, you had a very unique role in his life, and what was it and how did that happen?
I did. I feel like I'm one of the luckiest women in the world. I had the opportunity of a lifetime to work for President Ronald Reagan, to serve him as his executive assistant for 10 years in his post-presidency. So in 1989, when he left the White House, he came back to LA and set up a post-presidency office. I was a communications major in college at the time, and the great communicator had just left the White House, and he was the perfect convergence of everything I loved. I was always that nerdy little kid that loved, presidents and politics and government, and so here he was in my backyard. I took a chance. I wrote a letter to the office, was brought in for an interview, and hired basically on the spot for what I thought would be a short-term internship while I graduated. Following the end of that graduation, I was hired to work as the executive assistant to the chief of staff. Served in that capacity for a few years, and then Ronald Reagan's longtime executive assistant he had since before he was governor retired, and they asked me to take that job. You don't say no to that.
So what years did you work for him?
So I served him from 1989 when he left office until 1999 when he left the public eye. And as you probably know, he lived actually for another 5 years after that. So served him directly 10 of his final 15 years of his life.
What was he like as a man?
Terrific. Probably everything you thought and hoped that he was that, and maybe even a little bit better. He's one of those rare individuals that regardless of the pedestal you put him on, however much you admired him, when you met him in person, he was even more charming, more kind, more handsome, and just a wonderful person to work with.
Did he talk in that period of time? Did he discuss public policy and what was going on in the world? Because we really didn't hear too much from him as far as speaking on issues. Of course, a lot of presidents don't speak. I mean, as a courtesy to who's ever president then. But what kind of things did he, I mean, we can maybe guess, but what kind of things did he take an opinion about?
Yeah, he was very mindful of the fact that when you're not in the Oval Office, you don't have all the information that the sitting president has, and so he was very careful not to backseat judge or backseat drive the presidency. That being said, he had a couple of pet issues that he continued to speak out on. He believed that the whole idea of gerrymandering was very much against the will of the people to live and vote in blocks of people. He also thought that the line item veto was something that at the time 20-something governors had, and it wasn't something the president of the United States had, and just thought that that would be a great budget balancing tool. And he also spoke out against the 22nd Amendment, limiting the presidential term to 2 limits. I don't think he wanted to run for a 3rd limit, but again, he always trusted we the people to make the best choice and thought that maybe in a way that limited our choice as people.
You know, it's interesting because the only time since World War II when a party held the White House for 3 successive elections was Reagan-Bush, and many people viewed George Bush's 41 election as a 3rd term for Reagan to continue on those policies. How did he ever discuss President Bush, who was his successor, and was he generally supportive of him, or was he disappointed about certain things?
Well, he never jumped in to criticize or make comment unless it was solicited. And so, George Bush would reach out to Ronald Reagan often. They talked often on the phone. President Bush came by the office several times during the post-presidency to visit with President Reagan. And so they had a great affinity for each other. When you would see them together, you would see how they would light up with great affection and friendship. And so that was an important relationship for him to be continued ongoing. But Ronald Reagan was very careful, especially since he had been his vice president, not to backseat drive the Bush presidency.
Of course, he also, you were with him through some of the Clinton years. Did he comment much on the Clinton presidency with you?
No, he was very respectful of the office of the presidency itself. And so, he had great respect for the office of the presidency. It wasn't tied to partisanship. He knew that it was bigger than him or bigger than any person that served in that office. And so he was generally fairly quiet on his own personal policy opinions, but professionally very personally supportive of everybody who held that office.
He was a great joker and a great storyteller.
He was.
Did he regale you with stories of Hollywood or just other things as you were working with him?
He was more likely to tell stories about Hollywood than he was about his presidency, so which was always interesting. Those were really wonderful years for him. He loved those early years in California, raising his family and having so many great friends in Hollywood, and so he loved to talk about those days. He, of course, also loved to talk about his ranch and riding horses and all the things that maybe would surprise you rather than sitting and reminiscing about policy decisions in the 80s.
If someone wants to get your book, first of all, what is it historical? How would you describe your book? Is it showing us the personal side of Ronald Reagan, or just what does it cover?
Yeah, so it's a memoir, so it's my story of Ronald Reagan and what I saw and witnessed and exhibited those 10 years that I served him and on until the end of his life. And so it's not a policy book, it's not a political book, it's very much a character sketch of a man. It's also the story of an ordinary girl who wound up at the feet of greatness and got the opportunity to serve an extraordinary man. And what an incredible only in America story. Just like Ronald Reagan's, a boy born in the middle of a wide spot in the middle of Illinois to a poor family in the midst of the Great Depression. As you know, his father was an alcoholic, and you looked at the cards of his life and thought, nothing will come of this, nothing good could happen, and yet Ronald Reagan defied the odds and proved that really in America anything is possible.
Did he, last question, were there any tales, or how did he look at his life in Illinois? Did he share that with you growing up, or?
Oh, he loved it. He loved talking about, he was proud of being born in Tampico. All the years he spent in Dixon, I think, were some of the most fond memories that he had. He loved talking about Eureka College, and so over the course of the past several years, I've gotten to be in Central Illinois many, many times, and it's wonderful to picture him there and to really imagine all the things that small-town America invested into him and how he became such a great steward of that and took those small-town values of community and faith and patriotism and really got to exalt them not only on the national stage but globally.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, and if someone wants to get your book, can they find it?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any independent bookstore. It's available in hardback, audiobook, which I read for myself, ebook, and the paperback just came out on President Reagan's birthday a week or so ago, February 6th.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Stephanie Trussell, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. And we are here in Maryland at the CPAC conference, which is a national gathering of conservatives. And actually not just national, we have people here, I understand, from Australia even coming. Why are you here? Why do you make it a point to come here? It's a lot of travel, it's a lot of expense, but here you are.
Well, I come because I have a radio show, but I honestly will tell you that if I didn't have a radio show, I would come because this is a place for anyone that pays to get in or gets access to come in. It's a great place to meet other conservatives, but what's even more amazing, people that you see all the time on Fox News, on TV in general, walk right by you and engage you. When other when would you have another opportunity to have access to all these amazing people? And I have a big group of people on social media that I'm friends with that I've never physically met. I come to CPAC and I've had a chance to actually realize they're real people. And it's just to hear the messages. They always line up some phenomenal speakers. I don't know if it just it rejuvenates my beliefs, or just, especially at a time when we're talking about approval ratings and they still they've yet to accept the results of the election, and they're trying to take down our president. It's so great to see fired up people. But what gets me the most about coming here are the young people. Ted Cruz walked through here. All the young kids from Hillsdale College, you would have thought it was Justin Bieber following him. They just can't wait to get a picture with him. And it's Ted Cruz. I'm like, that's what gets me, because the Democrats started indoctrinating kids when they were really young. And here we've got a group of fired up young people that are very eager to be part of the movement. It's so easy for me to be a conservative. I'm an old lady, a grandma, and that's great. But they're in a campus environment where they're on the front line, and to be a conservative is like being a pariah. Just be anything other than that, how dare you? And so I love to encourage them, and they inspire me because they're so dedicated and just fiercely conservative. And this is a great place to meet everybody, young, old, new conservatives, or just the media presence. It's really an amazing.
Let me ask you this. You said you're a conservative.
Right.
Have you always been a conservative, and what values do you think constitutes a conservative?
Well, no. Well, I was born in Chicago in this packaging, so no, I inherited the Democratic Party. That's just what it is. And then when my husband bought a car in '93 that didn't have an FM radio, and he was going to put one in, never got around to it. And by that time, I'd found WLS. I was still a liberal, but it was so entertaining I couldn't turn it off, and one day it got me. And I realized that my values more aligned with the Republican Party and not the Democratic Party. So that was it was a scary time for me, because I had to come out of the closet to my family that I'm no longer a Democrat, that I'm a Republican now, which is not easy. It's probably easier to come out, a lot of different other things than being a Republican. But now that I have an opportunity to talk about my values and beliefs and what it means to be conservative, that's the other question. I do it on the radio. I just talk about, obviously limited government, the freedom. We're about school choices. We're about giving everybody the same opportunity. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party sees my packaging and thinks that it's a disability and they need to help me. And they get so annoyed when I don't want to be helped. I want the government to get out of my way, just like anybody else. So less regulations, and Americans get back to the business of making widgets like we did, without all of the unions and lobbies and everything else that's involved in that. And that's the principles. And just, being a constitutional conservative, where I believe in the values, and people like me will come up and say, the Constitution wasn't written for you. It was ugly sin of slavery. Yes, we get that. But why is it just an American sin? We didn't invent it. We weren't the first ones. And there were other countries that had way more slaves than we did. And we need to move on from that. As a result of my ancestors giving their life and labor to be, I get to be here. I get to live in the greatest country on the planet. I'm not going to waste that inheritance crying that, as I hear on the liberal side, that this country's not for you and a black man can't make it in America. And that's not true. We had, obviously, but they just love to still. They need a permanent underclass, and Rush Limbaugh says that all the time. And they need people to stay dependent on the donkey plantation. We'll help you. We'll take care of you. The Democratic Party cares about you. And that's not true. When I was 15 years old, Reagan ran for president the first time. On the west side of Chicago, which is a black neighborhood, I was told that Reagan was going to make us slaves again. And I'm thinking, really? Can he do that? But then I thought, no, come on, really? And at that time, I had a job at McDonald's, and I'm going to school, paying my tuition. I'm thinking he's going to have to catch me if he's going to make it. 'Cause I'm working, I'm busy, I got to go. And I still have yet to be assigned to a plantation, and the man had 2 terms. And so I realized a lot of the fears and dogmas that they told me were not true. And I got out in the real world, and not all white people are out to get me. And I grew into school in Marquette Park, where the KKK used to march. So I was kind of nervous my first day of school, but I wound up building great relationships with those girls, just treating each other like, just who cares? It didn't matter what color we were, and that's the beauty of America. I just can go on and on about how much I love the country, and I want everybody to feel that. I feel sorry for anybody who wakes up every morning and don't feel like they're in the greatest country on the planet.
So you're doing the radio show on Saturday evenings. It's 50,000 watts, so you get calls from probably all over,
oh my gosh,
especially in the evening. That signal will carry across the nation.
My show now is on Saturdays 1 to 3, but my show used to be Sunday nights 9 to midnight. and people would call me, and I'm in Vegas, I could hear your signal. I'm in Virginia. That was my tagline, from Vegas to Virginia, no internet needed, and that signal's bouncing. So that was really great for me to be able to organically reach people, because WLS has a reputation of being the station people fell asleep to when they were kids listening to rock and roll, and now, and people, everywhere you go, no matter where you are, WLS, I know WLS. And so to me, it's a big responsibility to come after all the amazing people, the ones that turned me from a crazy liberal in Rogers Park to who I am today. So yeah, I reach as many people as I can, and everybody wants to know what's going on in Chicago. It's the third largest market. It's the home of corruption and high fees and taxes, and it's never a dull moment, and especially being the home of Obama's new coming library. There's always news going on in Chicago.
You had told me off camera that when you started doing the radio, one of the things that got traction for you was that people were surprised that as a black woman you would be talking against Obama.
His hometown, right.
To what extent is there pressure within the black community to toe the line and remain part and parcel of the Democratic Party? President Trump said to the black community, reached out, said, what have you got to lose? Right. Let's talk about, I don't have that perspective within the black community. Mm-hmm. To what extent is there or is there not any sort of a awakening within the black community that maybe we need to rethink things?
Well, I, as a black Republican, I was reluctant to come out. I first came out as a conservative. I didn't want to tell my family. And I don't like to, I'll talk about it a little bit, about the kind of treatment I get and my family members disowning me, but I don't want to sound like a victim, when I do that. So that's why I don't talk about it. It is what it is. It's not easy. We're not allowed to be Republicans. Whites can pick a party, and that's fine. That's totally accepted. Right now, when you even tell someone that you're Republican, you're a sellout, you're a traitor to your race. And so, unfortunately, my problem with Republicans, especially in Chicago, where the deep blue Democrat machine has ruined the city, it's been running it since the 30s, why aren't we reaching out to those people saying, come on over to us, we believe in school choice, we'll help you with this, and we believe in limited government. We want to make it where people can open up a corner business in this neighborhood without all the intrusion. So they're very good at branding as the Santa Claus, and we'll take care of you. We have these programs where we don't have that in the Republican Party. I want to be more, and I hate to say, I keep saying the Harriet Tubman, I could never be Harriet Tubman, the Harriet Tubman of the Republican Party, to say that it's freedom over here. Come on over. It's not all the fears that you hear about it. You'll never fit in. I was told as a kid, the Republican Party is for rich white guys. They can't relate to you. And I'm thinking, what do you mean? I don't want a president that relates to me. I want a president that protects our borders, that defends the Constitution, and just basically gets out of my way so I can do what I need to do. And so, as I come here every year, this is my third year in a row, I see more and more people that look like me. And one day I won't have to talk about being a black Republican. My son is named Reagan. He's 13 years old, and I'm hoping by the time he can vote, that he will be allowed to vote Republican if he wants to, and it won't be an issue. You're a black Republican? Oh my goodness, the whispers, the stares, and it's just, you're a pariah. How dare you? Oh my goodness, you know what you. And I'm like, this is our. And I tell people, you need to educate yourself. When we were freshly freed, you couldn't, as a black woman, you couldn't bring home a Democratic man. You think about it, that was the party that fought to enslave us, to keep us enslaved. Why would we be Democrats? It's common sense. The Reconstruction, we were Republicans. And I got to see that at the African American Museum yesterday, a campaign button from a black Republican senators, and that was the party. And then what happened in the 60s, we can all debate that. And they'll say, well, Dixiecrats and all the races, they all came over to the Republican parties, and I was like, well, if that were true, how come blacks are still suffering under Democratic policies? Where I live in Republican County, where everybody's thriving, doing well, kids are getting educated no matter what color. You go to Chicago, and that's not the situation. And so we need to go back to our roots. We need to do more black history, because I am actually an authentic African American. I don't like to use that term, but because I am a Republican, this whole Democratic thing, I don't need to be helped. I don't need a program. And it's great if you can use it temporarily. But when your granddaughter's moving into the same housing complex that you lived in, you were supposed to do better, and each generation thrive and do a little bit better. My mother didn't graduate from high school. I went to college for like 2 weeks. And my daughter has a master's degree from a private university. That's my America. Every generation doing a little bit better. And it's for everybody. It's just not for white men to do well. And I hear so much. I spend a lot of time prepping for my show. I listen to liberal radio probably 50% of the time, and listening to the radio hosts as well as the callers. When I hear somebody that honestly believes this country isn't for them because they're black, I'm thinking, you see, black people are thriving every day. What are you talking? This isn't the 60s. This isn't the 40s. We are doing it. What are you waiting on? And it's just the greatest country. Get out there, and get some of the American pie, and your ancestors helped build this country, that's been paid for you. It's up to you to get out and make some decisions and move out of the ghetto and make some sacrifices and move to a place where your kids can be educated, so on and so forth.
Let me, let's close out. Let's bring it back as we tape this. We're about a month before the primaries in Illinois. What do you hear, and you're a good person because you get so much input via the radio station, what are you hearing, first of all, from Republicans as far as how they're leaning on the gubernatorial race?
I'm the person that's drawing a line in the sand. If you're a Republican and voted for Ronner last time, and several laws that he has implemented, he stabbed us in the back. He made a decision. He's skipping the primary election. He's trying to get Democrat liberal votes by doing things that even Governor Quinn wouldn't have done. What I'm hearing is that conservatives are upset about what he did, and he abandoned us. And so if I keep saying anyone that's in the media, anyone that's an elected official that hasn't distanced himself from Ronner, they're either on his payroll or they've got some other agenda, because he was staunchly went from 180 degrees of what he's promised. I'm excited about Jeannie Ives. I'm excited about a lot of people down the ticket that Jeannie Ives, once she gets there, she's going to need support so she can do, what did he say? I'm not in charge. Well, we need to make sure Jeannie has the vote so she can be in charge. And so I'm fired up. I know she's
Are you hearing this from your listeners as well?
I'm hearing that from listeners, and I'm on social media quite a bit. I have yet to meet anyone on the posting, maybe one person that said something about Jeannie Ives, and I'm like, wait a minute, are you really a Republican? Overall, I think that, I know she's this David Goliath thing, that she's this little, he's got all this money, but she's fearless. Her record speaks for itself, and this is it's refreshing. Somebody that's just out there, and you can YouTube her down in Springfield, standing up for us, and I mean the fact that she's from West Point. I'm thinking they should have maybe they should have a push-up contest and decide who's going to be governor. But I'm excited. Such a time as this, Illinois, it needs to be rescued to a certain degree. We need to make this a place that people can call home again, because everybody's leaving Illinois, and it's unfortunate. Going to other states where it's a lot easier to live there. And she talks about property taxes. And when I work at a senior center 2 days a week, when I meet these seniors that have raised their children, they've done everything right, paid in Social Security, they paid off their mortgage, but they're losing their house because of taxes. That's unacceptable. And that just breaks my heart. And I want a governor that's going to say, our taxes are too high, let's do something. I love when Jeannie's on the stump, she'll say, Indiana has roads and schools, and their taxes are aligned. Our taxes are way off the charts, and people are leaving, and they keep talking about progressive taxing the millionaires, and I always challenge the Democrats to say that. I'm saying, they're the ones that can leave. They don't have to stay here. We need to be attracting more taxpayers, not increasing the taxes. More people want to move here. That's how we're going to get more revenue.
All right, Stephanie Trussell, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Hans von Spakovsky, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
Good
It's been a while.
to see you again.
We always appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. One of the primary issues, and certainly one that President Trump talked about a lot when he was a candidate, is the issue of illegal immigration. We still now have the whole contention about building a wall, and here at CPAC where we are, that's a very popular notion. It got, I think, a standing ovation earlier when the Vice President mentioned it. You've been looking at the issue. What would you tell us, or what should we be focusing on as citizens in this debate?
Well, look, the president's been talking not just about illegal immigration, but our legal immigration system and how to change that too. He wants to go to a system where we actually take a look at, for example, the education, skill, financial backgrounds of immigrants. I think that's actually a good system. That's the kind of system places like Australia have. But look, if we're going to do a debate, and we're in the midst of a big debate about this issue, we should have accurate information about how many non-citizens are in the country. And that's why I recently wrote a piece about how they need to add a citizenship question back to the census. We have a census in 2020. It's just 2 years away. And we used to ask that question until the 2010 census. And then some progressive, liberal advocacy groups worked to try to take that question off. They didn't want it on there, and obviously we should return it because we want the most accurate data we have when we're debating issues like immigration and when we're making decisions about things like how we distribute federal funding, a lot of which depends on census data.
We heard just as early as December they were talking about the DACA people, and the number was 800,000. Then the president was more recently saying he would go with 1.8 million. You had mentioned we don't know the numbers. Where are these numbers coming from, and does anyone actually have a real number?
Well, the number of illegal aliens, a lot of that is guesswork. You know, Department of Homeland Security, their estimates range from 10 to 12 million. There are some groups that think it's higher. Right now, there are 690,000 individuals who are qualified under the DACA program. Remember, that was the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. The president has talked about expanding that to 1.8 million. It's not clear how he's going to do it, but what it may be is, remember, the DACA program, you could qualify if you got to the U.S. up until your 16th birthday. And Democrats, for example, in the Senate are talking about expanding that to the age of 18. So if you get to the U.S. before the age of 18, you would qualify under the program. And that would bring up anywhere from 1.8 to some estimates, perhaps as many as 3 million aliens. And I got to tell you, I don't think amnesty is a good idea. It will act as a magnet to bring even more illegal aliens into the country.
And what is your thought? You know, the wall is a contentious issue. Have you given thought to that? Is that something that would work in your estimation?
Well, look, people talk about the wall, but what they really mean is having a secure border. And what that means is that in places where a wall would be effective, San Diego, for example, where you have just flat terrain, it's very easy to get from Mexico in the United States. Having a wall, along with surveillance and regular patrols by the Border Patrol, could help vastly stem the tide. You might not need an actual wall in more remote areas along the border. You know, there are areas, mountainous areas, where it's very tough to get through. You might not need as physical a barrier, but you've got to have security all along the border, and it would depend on the geography of each mile of the border. And could that be effective? Yeah, if walls weren't effective, there wouldn't be one around the White House, you know, and there are many other examples like that.
We often say it's not about immigration, it's about illegal immigration.
Yeah.
And people will, on the other hand, also complain that our legal immigration system is just vastly too long and too expensive. Do they have a point? And if so, do you have any thoughts on what we can do to reform it?
Look, I agree with that, but people should keep in mind that we take in almost 1 million legal immigrants a year. There's a very large number, and that situation is complicated by the fact that we have what we call a chain migration system. You know, a newly naturalized citizen can sponsor not just his immediate family, and nobody disagrees. If you become a citizen, of course you should be able to sponsor your wife and your minor children. But that's not the system we have now. You know, the system we have now extends far beyond that immediate family, and processing those applications takes a huge amount of time. Right now there's a waiting list of 4 million. 4 million aliens who've been sponsored by other citizens to get into the country. And that's a problem that does need to be fixed.
So, should we expect anything to happen? This has been an issue that some people have spent their career on, and you know, Ronald Reagan 35 years ago was dealing with this, and here we are in 2018.
Right.
Is there anything different going to happen because the presidency of Donald Trump, or is we just going to get more talk and standoff?
Look, the president offered Democrats a pretty darn good deal. He said, look, give me funding for a secure border, end chain migration, end the visa diversity lottery program, allow me to go after sanctuary cities, and in exchange, I will give you amnesty and citizenship for 1.8 million illegal aliens. Democrats turned that down. They want the amnesty and the citizenship, but they're not willing to provide any of the other kind of security that the president is looking for. Unless Democrats are willing to compromise on that, we were not going to get a deal.
What can be done, if anything, with the number of illegal immigrants that are now in the country?
Well, in addition to what the president has told DHS to do, which is enforce the law, you could cause very large numbers of illegal aliens to self-deport if Congress made the E-Verify system mandatory. E-Verify is a system that employers can use to check and make sure that somebody they're hiring is actually a U.S. citizen or a legal non-citizen who's allowed to work. And then second, actually have the Justice Department enforce federal law which punishes employers who knowingly and intentionally hire illegal aliens. This would cause large numbers of illegal aliens to self-deport. Why? Because if you can dry up the job market, the ability of illegal aliens to earn money, which they remit back to their home countries, if they can't find work anymore, they're going to go home. And that would be a way of, I think, substantially reducing the number of illegal aliens inside the country.
Hans Spakovsky, thank you again.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.